yeah, back from doing regionals, and that was a lot of fun. It was really nice seeing everyone. Everyone who said hello was just awesome, and it's really good to see all the players that I spent a lot of time sort of chatting online with and testing with. So yeah, that was just all great fun. We ended up bringing Blue Steel. I did bring Ruby Amethyst in the backpack as well. And then I think the amounts of like copium and hopium hit me quite hard, and it was just if I get this run of the certain decks and the deck does exactly what I want to do, I can make it through. But the best of two format is quite unforgiving. There was a few games in there where I just thought if this was a best of three, I would have won. It didn't matter if I was on the play or on the draw. I just felt I had the game, but some games Blue still does what Blue still does. I had one match where I just drew three grab your swords in a row, and you just think, if this was a game three and we just took that variance out, I think I could have won the game, and it didn't matter if it was on the play or on the draw, because in that set I lost the game on the play through bricking, and then won the game on the draw as the deck was just running smoothly. But yeah, all opponents were great. Everyone I saw there was great. Really great environment. I mean, especially as hearing some of the stuff that happened in Vegas with what players were doing. It was just great to see Birmingham one done, and of course it's my home country. My home country is my country. So yeah, it was nice. It was really really nice fun to go to. Yeah, the list sort of we went for it, not taking for Steel Song. We ended up 2-0ing a Steel Song, which was really nice. It felt like Fire the Cannons really on was just important. And then we put some text in for Ruby Sapphire. I think with the Hardhead Beast, I think that just completely goes. I got 0-2'd Ruby Sapphire Sound 1. Guy was really good. Had lots of answers from a deck. Got to about 19 lore, and then just they won the board back hard, and then they can flip it quite quickly with their dime and their Tamatoas. So it felt like any effort to make the Ruby Sapphire matchup was not worth it. So just Pete and Ariel should have been carrying that matchup as it is, and you can use that tech space for something else. So the Hardo Beasts definitely would probably be going. It was nice to have more 5 drops to, just have something else to play on 5. Especially as the games where I bricked and missed ramp on 3, which happened fairly often, even though we were doing like 6 card mulligans. So I'm trying not to be too salty, but there was I guess, a bit of variance there. And when you look back on a event, you have to sort of take that in and say, well, I think if the deck was doing what it was doing in practice, it would have been fine. But all in all, it was a good run. And as I say, best of two is so tight. And I didn't feel like I didn't get the matchups I wanted. I felt like I kind of did really. Some of those draws I think I could have turned into wins, maybe if they were in best of three as well. But overall, yeah, it felt like there was such a small turnout of Blue Steel, and I just, at this point, the reason why I always like Blue Steel is I like to play the deck that's very in meta, very high chance of winning the event, but hasn't have a big meta share turnout. And recently, it's felt like Blue Steel is not in that category. It's just you're playing a weaker deck, but you're playing it because you like it, you're comfortable on it, and you sort of enjoy it. And yeah, I enjoy it, but I also enjoy playing lots of decks in the game. So the one that sort of taken my interest has been Lemon Lime, just because I got to meet Alphos up again, who's a great friend. Um, he managed to go into a top 32, a great run with that deck, and it just feels like the way that deck's been placed right now is just in the meta. It's very meta viable. It's very good. Has very good matchups. It doesn't seem to get much play. So it still gets like play like 3 to 5% meta share at events. So I feel like I'm not saying Lemon Lime is the new Blue Steel, but it goes into that category of it's very meta viable. It just doesn't have a big turnout. And the reason why I like playing a very meta viable deck, but I don't like playing like a Ruby Sapphire where it's like 30% of the meta, is I just don't like mirrors. So I want to win, but I just don't want to play mirrors. And to be honest with you, Blue Spills went up and down on that. In set 4, it was like I had like 3 mirrors in Bologna, and it was just like, yeah, okay, the deck's kind of really fun run. It was one of the top 4. So maybe I should have took a step back then as well. But you live and you learn. It's always good to analyze and don't get too upset with your results, or just try and learn something from it, if anything. So yeah, overall a good fun time for me, really. I had great fun and saw loads of people there. So I was going to talk about the meta shares for just to make sure. Yeah, this is the one for Birmingham, and I think looking at it is exactly what people expect it to be. I thought maybe Ruby Amethyst would still be holding its weight, but the deck sort of it's interesting to see it's fallen down a little bit. And a 14% meta share, it's still the third most popular deck at the event. You know, that's still big, but I just felt like the popularity of Ruby Amethyst, and it's that deck that everyone sort of always loved. And I know there's a lot of Ruby Amethyst players in the UK and in Europe, and I just thought it might have retained a bit more of its. I thought it might even be above Amber Steel. But this meta share is nothing like, it's not insanely different to what we expected to see. Ruby Sapphire, of course, topping as the hyper control deck that generally doesn't really lose into anything. Maybe Ruby Amethyst and hyper aggro can be rough for it, but I find most Ruby Sapphire pilots aren't saying I just completely don't want to see that, but they probably don't want it as a matchup, but they think they can take it. They want to get some steel matchups and stuff like that. And then Amber Steel's run sort of didn't really go that far. I mean, we were listening to the event on the radio in the car home. On the radio, it was quite interesting. It was like we had the Twitch on like a radio thing, we just listened to the plays. And hats off to Lorcana Villains Bessie. You guys did an amazing job. It just generally sounded like we were listening to the commentary of a football match or something like that. That was amazing. Like how we would like just felt we were there and we could see all the cards being played out. It was awesome. But yeah, Ruby Sapphire did amazing. Amber Steel, I assume then it's just this 410 Ruby Sapphire. Amber Steel, so on top of that, it doesn't want to see the Ruby Sapphire because it will 1-1 at best into that matchup. And then on top of that, Amber Steel is a high rolling wheel deck, so it requires a very good run for it to be operating sort of at max capacity. So maybe that's why we just saw it fizzle out near the top of the end. And then looking at the bottom, it felt like Blurple was everywhere because all of my friends were pairing into Blurple all the time. And they're like, oh, I just played another Blurple. And then on the stream, they did Blurple after Blurple, like 2 matches in a row. I was like, Blurple's like the big deck. I'm going to have to do loads of videos on it. I was like, oh, it's really cool. And then it just sort of fizzled out, and it's just where it's sort of usually sat. It's a fun deck, and I think it's not bad, but let's say it's not winning anything. And then, yeah, Blue Steel taking quite the meta dump that I thought it wouldn't have done. I assumed it would be around Amber Steel, but looking at sort of 2K and 1K events, we saw it sort of always being a little bit above it. So like if Purple Steel had a 9% share, Blue Steel would have like a 12%. It was the more popular pet deck, I think, in my opinion. But see it taking a slump down to 4%. I think that's actually right when I look at it objectively. And I felt really bad for any of the like Ruby Amethyst or Amethyst Emerald players that played into me, because it was like, sorry, you're against like one of the Blue Steel players here, one of the 4%, and we're basically going to gatekeep your run by taking some games off you. So yeah, that's just generally how that felt playing it at the event. And yeah, looking at that field, there isn't much there. We played into that we just really stomped out. It was very much a hard grind every matchup, and I don't think that's what you want at these regionals. So yeah, Blue Steel being at the 4% is fine. And the interesting point here as well, I'm going to go for each of these actually. I'm going to go for Amber Emerald, which I think, yeah, it's probably the deck that I want to look at the most next. I think it's really cool. I think you just learn your lines. I think there's a lot of solitaire you can play with that as well, where it's just you get really good at it and then just they do what they do, especially if you're into a matchup where your opponent isn't on green or amber, so they have no hand disruption or discard. It's just you just play your game and try and discard them out. So I think that's really interesting. Amber Emeralds, Amethyst Emeralds, this seems like the set for it. It got to a second finish. The players I see on it, it feels very much in that category of Ruby Amethyst, where if you know how to play it and you know how to play bounce package and you know how to play the deck, you just can push it way further than you can. Someone once said to me, if you're not one of the 1% of Ruby Amethyst players in the world, don't play Ruby Amethyst. And I think Amethyst Emerald might go into that category as well. If you're not one of the top and you just understand it and it makes sense and it flows for you, just don't play it. But take that with a pinch of salt. Both awesome decks, and it's great to see the sort of meta actually. Besides that big chunk at the top of Ruby Sapphire, it's sort of fitting out to quite an interesting meta. And Amber Amethyst, that was a take it and hope for a good run. I actually won 1-1. Game 1 I saw no grab your swords, no Tinkerbell, and then game 2 it was like 2 grab your swords, 2 Tinkerbells, and it's just out for them at that point. But I think there's definitely a deck you can bring. You can learn it to the best of your ability and then take your chances on the day. And when I used to play other TCGs like Pokemon, if I just really wasn't feeling the meta or didn't know what I wanted to play, I'd take a hyper aggro deck, learn my lines as perfectly as I can, and just take it for a spin and see what happens. that deck's very solitaire gaming. You're not really ever thinking about your opponent's board. You don't ever really want to trade. You might play a befuddle. That's about as far as you go. So yeah, that looks expected. I think maybe a bit more of a meta share than I thought it would be, but it didn't do much in the top cut. And I think in Vegas there was one I saw on the stream at top 32 that was doing all right. But yeah, that sounds about right to me. And the interesting part here though is when we go to the Vegas, so the green steel sort of um, excitement didn't really hit Birmingham that hard. In the forums and stuff like that, in discords and stuff like that, it was very clear that a lot of American players, and I'm assuming the teams who practiced together, had very intensively gone for an Emerald Steel deck, and they had these lists hidden away, and we saw Bivens and we saw Zan play these awesome lists as well. So yeah, it is very clear that Emerald is just very good, and it's never not good. Maybe the appearance of the deck took a bit of a knock with Bucky falling out, but overall, all of the cards are very good. Discard and Disruption is just a very good thing to do. So yeah, it didn't the craze didn't really hit the Europe that much, but when I go over to Las Vegas's day one meta, we can see Emerald Steel. It's still not taking that much, but I know why. That because the other graphic is the Emerald Steel meta share transfer to how much of it actually transferred to day two, and it was quite big. As we see, like Bivens was top seed in at the end of day one, and then Zan went on to win it as well. So overall, I think what's going to come from this event is just a big influx of green. Green steel is going to be quite popular, but besides that, if we look at it, the meta turnout has been almost identical. You know, a few percent here and there, but overall, it's sort of been the same turnout for both events. So exactly what we predicted, and it's kind of interesting. Like I say, if you're not hooked into the sort of real connected into the community in discords and talking to as many players as you can. I'm very fortunate. I get to talk to quite a lot of the top players and stuff like that, and have conversations with them and see what they're thinking. And yeah, it was Green Steel was very much always mentioned, and then what Green Steel list we would use and what Green Steel cards we would use. Of course, I'm quite interested as well. I took it to Lille. I really like Green Steel. I really like Merfolk Flynn, but that wasn't the lists that were coming out. The list that mainly came out were these strong mid-range lists. And yeah, I was just saying it's interesting that if you're not in that environment where you can chat with these players, before we had Pixelborn, where it was thousands of people playing a virtual game, and it was an ecosystem where you could just tap into and see that Greensteel was doing very well. You could check the leaderboards, you could check people streaming. You know, Zavich was huge, thousands of followers, and loads of other players as well. And you could just see what they're playing. You go, I want to play that. But now we're in this sort of closed door. People practice in their local metas. If people aren't posting about it, you aren't likely to know it. We look at Inkdex, we look very closely for meta reports there, and of course there wasn't really any green steel popping off there, so people were keeping those lists away from those events, or they just hadn't formed yet, because the meta also is just not moving as fast as it used to with an online client. An online client, the meta sort of the end of a meta would happen quite quickly. We'd get to it by a few weeks, and then what we'd see at events is just all end meta decks, basically, with a few tweaks here and there. But yeah, it's just really interesting to see, and I think green steel as well going forward. I don't think it shapes the meta too much. I think decks just have to think about the matchup. I think maybe that was a big aspect of it. Unless you'd seen Zan's list in the top cut, you probably wouldn't think there is a hypnotize. You'd assume there's the Ursulas and maybe a sudden chill, but maybe not a hypnotize. And you wouldn't know what direction they were going with the deck and what cards are in it. But now that lists are out there, I think people will generally be thinking when they build their list now, how do I also play against Green Steel? Because Green Steel is a very top meta contender deck. Um, but yeah, I think that's all we really learned from the events. Ruby Sapphire is still just dominating, and I think if you were on it and you took it to the weekend, and if you did well or did bad, there's no reason for you to not use it anymore. I think maybe the Amber Steel players might think, okay, our deck kind of gets gatekeeped by the top meta share. And then the rest, like if you're a Ruby Amethyst player and you still want to play Ruby Amethyst, do. If you're a Hyper Aggro player, I think you just keep taking your chances with that. And then the blue steel and the amethyst steel and that sort of, and the other, I'm going to look at them as well. If you just, yeah, you're not feeling it, you're thinking your deck's kind of underpowered this set, you're not alone. And if you want to look at other lists for the rest of the events coming forward, it's not a bad idea either. I would definitely be looking at something else for Seattle. As just yeah, I think Blue Steel requires a very god's run, and we saw Lamb had a very good run, just did amazingly, and the Merlin's Cottage was awesome to watch. Watch that on stream. But yeah, I feel like I want to try something different in an event as well, and I like to bring a different deck to each event as I can. I've done Blue Steel twice now and Green Steel once. But yeah, I think besides yeah, all from the weekend, it was everything was expected, but Green Steel has a bit of a resurgence, it seems.